On this edition of Southern Newsweek, we take a sneak peek at Dunedin's first co-housing development. A Dunedin 9-year-old tops the country in maths and science, and the shooting of 13 people at Adamoana is remembered 30 years on. Kia ora, I'm Daryl Baser. Dunedin's first co-housing development is nearing completion, with residents hoping to move in early next year. With 2 of the 24 units possibly coming up for sale, people are being invited to learn more about the advantages and philosophy behind co-housing.
7 years into planning, Dunedin's Toiora High Street co-housing neighbourhood is nearing completion, with residents hopefully moving in before winter next year. Because a few of the intended occupiers have now changed their plans, 2 of the units might be rented out, and another 2 units might be put on the market. But unit owner Gay Buckingham says those interested in applying need to realise there's a strong expectation of neighbourliness.
The important thing is that people need to know about co-housing before they know about the units, because we're not trying to just sell property on the open market. We're committed to a philosophy of co-housing which is built on sustainability and the caring for those around you and knowing your neighbours.
Buckingham says New Zealanders are beginning to appreciate the value of community spirit as well as the thermal efficiency and triple glazed windows of a passive house.
A concept that New Zealanders have struggled with for a while, but I think increasingly because of the cost of housing and because people realise that things like the passive house standard that we're building to are important. I think there's much greater acceptance than there was.
And despite their cookie-cutter exterior, Buckingham says each of the 24 units will be unique.
It's great. It's going to be so interesting. The architecture's interesting and clever. The different varieties and sizes of properties means that you're going to be going, even though they look similar, when you go in you're going to find different layouts and people with their different tastes and things.
A workshop to learn about the advantages and philosophy behind the co-housing development is set to be held on Sunday the 22nd of November. In Dunedin, the South Today.
A Dunedin 9-year-old at Māori Hill School is the top pupil for maths and science for his age across the whole of New Zealand. He's been writing computer code for a couple of years and is already taking classes at an intermediate level, despite being a year away from finishing his primary education. Dunedin 9-year-old Torrin Stevens has just been named the top Year 5 pupil in New Zealand for maths and science. Although when he sat the assessment, he admits there was an aspect he wasn't too sure of.
Back when I did the thing, I didn't know what hypotenuse and about the different types of averages. Yeah. So I just guessed a random answer, and then that day I asked Daddy what hypotenuse and median and mode were.
As it turns out, his fortunate guesses were correct, the knowledge contributing to his top scores. The knowledge he's acquiring and skills he's developing have practical applications in many areas, including writing computer code for games and robots. And it's with robotics he's also tasted success.
The team that I was in did come first in the robotics regionals and second in the nationals.
Torrin's father works in the IT sector with a similar passion for maths, science and also music. During this year's COVID-19 lockdown, Torrin rewrote the words of the Beatles' hit Come Together with references to the pandemic and social distancing, recording it with several schoolmates via a Zoom meeting. Māori Hill School Principal Verity Harlech says she's proud of all of the school's pupils, but is particularly impressed with young Torrin's achievements.
It's quite spectacular to have a student who's achieved the highest score in 2 different categories and curriculum areas for Year 5 out of 300 schools in New Zealand.
Harlech says Torrin is part of a group called Patiki Kids, from primary schools across the city, which spend a regular amount of time at Dunedin North Intermediate, learning at levels above primary school. She says his home environment is having a strong positive influence on his education. Torrance Stevens was due to receive his awards at a ceremony this afternoon, but in the meantime it's back to class after the laces are done up. In Dunedin, the South Today. A Mccann painting sold at a London auction recently has been exposed as a forgery. The Dunedin artist who painted it in 1987 says it was always intended to be seen as a tribute to Mccann and was clearly marked as such upon completion. But in recent years, someone has added a forged signature to the work to increase its value.
Dunedin jeweller and painter John Z. Robinson is indignant to learn that someone has taken one of his artworks, added a forged signature and then tried to pass it off as an authentic Colin Mccann.
It's sad that someone's going to take a painting that you've done, something you're responsible for, and alter it so that it is sort of pretending to be something that it's not, and also something that potentially has a lot more value by being what it's not.
The artwork is one of about 6 paintings Robinson created back in 1987 as a tribute after McCann's death. With the more recently added forged signature, it's now sold at a London auction for more than $13,000. But Robinson says the painting is clearly not a Mccann because of the shimmer of bright gold where the land meets the sea.
Mccann never used colours like that, and plus I'm pretty sure he didn't use artist acrylic paint that I was using. A lot of the paint that he used is actually house paint, acrylic and enamel.
Art curator Barbara Brinsley agrees that people should not have been fooled by the painting.
Well, in my view, it's got too many lines and too many curves, and there aren't actually many lines. There are black objects in it, 2 black objects, but no, not just by looking at it, it doesn't look like a Mccann.
Robinson, who was merely making a tribute to Mccann, says it's actually quite difficult to forge Mccann's works.
His handwriting is very distinctive, and all those paintings, the lads, you can just see they're just done in one stroke, a lot of them, things like that. He had an assurity that is very, very rare, and it's distinctly his own.
The London auction house is now offering the buyer a full refund. In Dunedin, the South Today.
It's been 30 years since Adamoana resident David Gray killed 13 people in the typically quiet seaside village. Those who Gray gunned down on 13 November 1990 were remembered on Saturday at the Adamoana Memorial. Remembering the 13 people gunned down by David Gray on November 13, 1990 in Adamoana. Retired Senior Constable Paul Buchanan organised a weekend of events to honour the anniversary of one of the deadliest shootings in New Zealand's history.
One word, be humbling. Just get the guys back together again. I've got my family here with me, which is fantastic.
Candles for each of the people slain circle the monument near flowers and tributes. Some from direct family members, others from the wider community. Buchanan says organising the weekend's events brought memories, both good and terrible, flooding back. Southern District Commander Paul Basham says Buchanan did an outstanding job.
I suspect he'll feel a strong sense of obligation to Sergeant Guthrie, his police colleagues and to the police family to get the event this weekend right, and I think he's done that in spades, and I commend him for that.
Port Chalmers Sergeant Stu Guthrie was shot by Gray when he attended the scene, becoming the 32nd police officer killed in the line of duty. The flag on top of the Port Chalmers police station rests at half-mast. Speaking after the day's service, Paul Basham says losing a fellow officer is just like losing a family member.
We're a whānau. It's sad and it's poignant as we gather today, but there's a tremendous sense of esprit de corps. Even those that have retired or left police, you never really leave, you're always part of the family, and those men and women will gather today, they'll share their grief, they'll support one another, and they'll celebrate some of those memories as well. So today's a very important day.
Police have released video tributes to Sergeant Guthrie on the 30th anniversary of what's become known as the Adamoana massacre. Paul Buchanan says people gather every year to reflect and talk, but he said he wanted to make the 30th anniversary special. At Adamoana, the South Today. Still to come on Southern Newsweek, protesters object to blood phosphate being used as fertiliser in New Zealand, and a graveyard near Omako is blessed before an archaeological dig. Protesters blocked trucks from entering a Dunedin fertiliser depot this week. 24 Extinction Rebellion campaigners say the chief executives of Balance Agri-Nutrients have blood on their hands.
Free Western Sahara!
About 15 people gathered at the entrance of Balance Agri-Nutrients near Mosgiel this morning as part of a nationwide protest to stop the company and Ravensdown from purchasing phosphate from a disputed area in Western Sahara. Protest spokesman Jack Brazil says the fertiliser extraction near Morocco is funding a war.
So recently Morocco ended their ceasefire, so this is putting Sahrawi lives on the line in an even more brutal occupation. We've had friends in Western Sahara send us videos and pictures documenting the brutality and violence they're enduring.
He says mining of Western Sahara's lands has placed more than 170,000 people in refugee camps since the 1970s. And Ravensdown and Balance are among the last of the independent companies in the world still purchasing phosphate from Western Sahara. In 2018, the High Court of South Africa seized a shipment of blood phosphate heading to New Zealand.
So we're here today to close down Balance for human rights abuses and to send a message strong and clear across Aotearoa today that we will no longer tolerate this continued participation in the global edifice of the supply chain.
Balance says it's conscious of the different perspectives around Western Sahara and has taken its lead from the United Nations. Balance says its management and directors visit the Western Sahara on a regular basis to evaluate compliance with both the UN framework and its own legal and ethical criteria. In Dunedin, the South Today.
Oamaru's Victorian heritage was celebrated last weekend with a host of events. Organisers say everything went off with a hitch of a corset and a hustling bustle. It was possibly more than just a jump to the left as Oamaru went on its annual Victorian time warp.
And today we've had the grand parade this morning, followed by the grand photograph where we managed to get everybody from the parade in for a photograph. So we had all of the costumes and all of the different vehicles and things in there, as well as the two pipe bands, one from North Otago and one from Christchurch.
There was definitely more hustle and bustle in Oamaru over the weekend, with organisers saying more people chose to dress in period costume this year.
It has been phenomenal. We've had so many people turn up in costume, more than we have over the last few years. A lot of locals getting involved. It has been absolutely fantastic to see how many people have actually turned up to celebrate today. And with the beautiful sunshine, it's been absolutely perfect.
The weekend's events were the pinnacle of festivities, which began last week as the North Otago town tarted itself up in very old-school finery.
And the window display competition, which is where local retail businesses display Victorian in their windows for the week of the celebrations.
Victorian Heritage Celebrations Coordinator Anisha Lee says the global COVID-19 pandemic may have given people more time to prepare for the event while in lockdown, and they now enjoy being able to gather en masse in public. The Wizard of Christchurch took part in events, including a walk through town accompanied by vintage vehicles. In Oamaru, the South Today. Researchers began the excavation of parts of the Drybread Cemetery about 10 kilometres north of Omako in a bid to locate unmarked graves. The project is being run by the University of Otago and Southern Archeology, with similar sites already examined in Milton and Lawrence, as well as Cromwell.
Both Anglican and Chinese blessings and prayers were performed at the Drybread Cemetery near Omako yesterday. The ceremony paves the way for an archaeological dig assisted by University of Otago Department of Anatomy Research Fellow Dr. Charlotte King in a bid to locate unmarked graves and identify who they belong to.
With this amount of time that's passed, individuals are usually fully skeleton, so we don't expect any soft tissue, although sometimes hair is preserved. Occasionally we get fragments of clothing, but things that are made of sort of natural materials tend to preserve less well in the ground, so it's just those harder tissues like bones and teeth that we tend to find.
Minute samples from any unmarked grave they find will be processed at the University of Otago's laboratory, providing a lot of information about the person buried there.
We might be able to find out where people were from, so whether they were Chinese, whether they were European, whether they were using dangerous chemicals, so the kinds of things that might have killed them in the past. We never guarantee that we can find a cause of death, but looking at that kind of thing. We know a lot of these miners experienced very traumatic lives, so we can see evidence of that trauma in the bones, in healed fractures and not healed fractures. And ultimately we just want to reconstruct their lives enough maybe to be able to identify people, but if nothing else to give a marker of who they were when they are reburied.
Dry bread was established during the gold rush in the early 1860s, but only lasted about 30 years. Leslie and Macy Wong blessed the ground as a way of giving Chinese approval for the university's archaeological dig.
There are Chinese buried here. We don't know where they are. They've been excised and dumped as marginalised people, possibly outside the cemetery boundary. We don't know. The cemetery have been reboundaried and the Chinese are probably definitely outside the boundaries. But they were the early settlers that had the courage to come here, to break the ground, to lay the foundations for us, the future generations to come.
The dig is expected to finish around mid-December. In Dry Bread, the South Today.
The visiting West Indian cricket team were finally able to exit isolation last weekend and start practicing for their first matches in Queenstown. The team has spent 2 weeks in quarantine since arriving in the country late last month.
40 West Indies cricket team members and their staff were enjoying the sunshine at Queenstown's John Davies Oval over the weekend as they prepared for their test matches and T20I games in December. Their manager says they're very happy to be finally out of doors and enjoying the warm spring weather after 14 days in quarantine.
Last time we were here there was snow on the mountain tops.
Right.
As I look there now I can still see some snow, but at least the sun is out.
Yeah.
And just being at this beautiful facility and the boys can actually get to practice in the outdoors, do what they love doing, do what they came here to do. We are very happy for that.
The team are set to play 2 warm-up games against New Zealand A at the Queenstown Events Centre at the end of this month.
Now that the guys have the opportunity to start playing, that's what we would like them to do, to be out there, to play cricket, and we are looking forward to, actually getting some games, to get the feel of the conditions. There are a lot of new players, first time to New Zealand, so we want to give them the opportunity to go and see, how the pitches would play, the different conditions.
December will see the players flying north to play 2 test matches and 3 other games in the North Island. In Queenstown, the South Today.
Still to come on Southern Newsweek, the scaffolding for a protective cover is hoisted onto a Dunedin Cathedral, and school pupils pan for gold at a Geology Department Outreach Day. A large crane was used to delicately move a huge structural scaffolding section into place above St Pauls Cathedral in Dunedin recently. The work signals a new phase in the cathedral's recovery from a damaging fire 3 months ago.
Dunedin's St Pauls Cathedral had a large structure made of scaffolding craned onto the west end of the roof, which was damaged by fire in mid-August. The scaffolders say it's been one of the most challenging rooftop constructions they've ever worked on.
There's been a lot of engineering gone into this, so we've had BM Consult from Wanaka and Clint Parkinson also from Scaff Consult engineering this for us. So there's been a lot of time and a lot of effort put into getting this right.
It took scaffolders about 2 weeks to assemble the almost 7-ton structure in the garden next to the church in readiness for yesterday's crane hoist.
It's pretty complex because we have to follow all the measurements, but that's what's done by the engineers, or else it's not going to sit to where it is right now. So we have to be very careful with the measurements.
And it's not over yet, with another smaller section still to be added to the west end of the cathedral roof.
The dimensions of this, we're looking about 15 metres and we're running on a 45-degree angle, so it's quite a tricky one. There's also an extra nose that we're going to chuck on that's actually going to go over where the roof, actually, as you can see, is tarpaulin, so we're going to cover that second. So we're going to put a first roof structure up and then we're going to do the second part to it.
The scaffolding is to be draped in a plastic protective tent so that roof repairs can be undertaken in all weathers. In Dunedin, the South Today.
Dunedin school pupils were recently given the opportunity to find gold while spending a day at the University of Otagos Geology Department. The youngsters had a go at gold panning and creating mini earthquakes as part of the outreach program.
These Year 10 pupils from Kaikarai Valley College and Logan Park High School had the chance to strike it rich by panning for gold in an outreach session put on by the University of Otago Geology Department yesterday. The sedimentary sand was sourced for the pupils by Associate Professor James Scott.
So there's gold all through central Otago in the sedimentary rocks, and so I went out and collected just some buckets of it and brought it back to geology.
The outreach included a look at how the environment and topography can influence each other, as well as interpreting data from a cell phone app that can read the S and P waves generated by earthquakes. The Year 10 pupils, who are equivalent to fourth formers, are at a point in their lives to see if sciences such as geology might appeal to them.
Year 10 is they're still finding out what their interests are, and we're trying to just sort of demonstrate that geology is a science, and it's an important science and contributes to a variety of different environments.
I mean, I really enjoy science, but I want to do something to do with tourism, I think.
I'm not good at maths, but apparently according to grades and the fact that I'm here, I'm pretty good at science. So I might try out that, give it a wee bit of a go.
Professor Scott says there's more jobs out there for geology graduates than just in the oil fields and gold mines.
A number of our students do go and graduate and work in exploration or environmental sides of things. But I mean, a lot of students end up working in councils, working as academics, so it's more than just what we're also trying to convey today is that it's more than just about resources and extraction of resources.
In the end, most of the pupils managed to take home a flake or two of gold, with an estimated value of 10 cents. In Dunedin, the South Today.
All things Scottish were on display at the annual Highland Games in mid-Canterbury recently. The event has grown in the past 8 years to include representatives from 21 different Scottish clans.
Now very much an annual fixture in mid-Canterbury, the annual Hororata Highland Games were held on Saturday. Scottish clans were out in force at the specially set up St Andrew's Square, with Scottish cuisine and beverages on offer. Advice was also available for people to trace their family history. New Zealand Society of Genealogists member Natasha Wells says during lockdown there was an upsurge in the potentially addictive hobby of researching family history.
Perhaps with all the family around the house you start telling stories and asking questions. There have been a few people who have got interested recently, which has been exciting. I do always give people the caveat that it can become addictive, so be wary and be prepared and open-minded for whatever surprises you might have. They're not common, they're not often, but they can happen.
Clan Keith had their tent between the once warring Campbells and MacDonalds. Ian Dixon says after losing much of their lands in Scotland 300 years ago, the clans spread out across the globe, often under different surnames.
A lot of Dixons settled in Southland. There are Austins around here who were early settlers. Keith itself is quite a rare name.
Dixon also demonstrated the use of 18th century broadswords and a shield called a tagi.
Tagi weighs about as much as a modern rifle, and it's a defensive weapon made of soft wood, leather, and on the back normally fur and some kind of padding, and nailed up to turn a blade. So these are called total melee weapons because they can be used in all sorts of ways. So if I'm fighting you, I don't want to hack your arms and legs off. I actually want to stab you in your soft parts. So I'll aim for the belly, the lower part. And if you're armed like this, that's hard to defend.
Yep.
It's called a total melee weapon because if I get too close to cut you, I just got to punch you with the basket hilt. And so much so that this little piece of the basket hilt is known as the nose breaker. And if you're a short person, I won't even do that. As I go by, I'll give you a whack on the top of the head with this.
The gathering of the clans at the Hororata Highland Games has grown from 3 clans in 2012 to 21 this year. The event was first held to help the small rural community recover from the then recent Canterbury earthquakes. Organisers of this year's Games overcame uncertainty to help the community recover from the COVID-19 lockdown earlier this year. In Hororata, the South Today.
And that wraps up this edition of Southern Newsweek. For the latest news from the Southern region, head online to odt.co.nz and follow Channel 39 on Facebook and YouTube. Ka kite anō.
Supporting local content so you can see more of New Zealand on air.